Let's bring in Micah Halper, a Middle East analyst, and Omar Baddar, Deputy Director of the Arab American Institute. And Omar, first to you, is this plan, whatever it is it dead on arrival once it's introduced?
Pretty much, I think that's the correct assessment. You know, the Trump administration is the single most viciously anti-Palestinian administration in recent memory, certainly in the entire history of the so-called U.S. peacemaking process, which is, by the way, is quite the bar when you consider the fact that previous administrations have been very biased towards Israel in terms of unconditional diplomatic support and military aid. So what we're looking at right now is either the fantasy that this anti-Palestinian administration is going to suddenly make a U-turn and put forth a proposal that's going to be reasonable, or we can deal with the reality based on the evidence that we see, which is that whatever plan is going to be put forward is going to be an attempt to pummel the Palestinians into submission and try to force them to submit to Israel's will, which by no stretch can be described as a peace deal because the Palestinians will never sign it. And even if you were to coerce Abbas somehow to sign that deal, it certainly is not going to lead to peace, because any agreement that falls significantly short of delivering justice to the Palestinian people and their rights is not going to lead to a long-lasting peace.
Micah, your thoughts?
Well, first, I should say from the very outset that uncharacteristic of Washington, the few people who have actually seen this deal have been mum. And we really don't, for a year and a half, we know absolutely nothing. And I've really tried to pry it out of them. We know nothing about what potentially is in this deal. But I can agree that because the Palestinians are not even at the table, the deal has very little chance of succeeding.
And even if the deal asks for major sacrifices on the Israeli side, is there the political will for Netanyahu's government to support the kind of sacrifices that they may be asked to make as part of this?
Yeah, it's not really a very good time to create this deal. And if you were asking me, if the administration in the United States were asking me, is this a good time? Well, last week wasn't either, and next week isn't either. So that's why they've sort of shelved it for such a long time. It's not a good time to move ahead on this. It's just a reality.
Now, is there perhaps, are there elements, Omar, of this that could be implemented? And I'm thinking a lot of people have suggested, regardless of what's in the overarching deal, if there are some more cultural exchanges, if there are more business ties, if there are more sports exchanges, that at least laying the groundwork perhaps for the next generation to get to know Israelis and Palestinians from a younger age, that at least you can plant the seeds for what may come 20 or 30 years from now.
I really don't see it that way at all, because ultimately the cause of the conflict is not a cultural misunderstanding between Israelis and Palestinians. The core of the problem is a very deliberate injustice that Israel is imposing on the Palestinians through occupation and settlement expansion and denial of basic rights. And the way that you solve that injustice is politically, by ending the injustice that Israel is imposing on Palestinians. So while these might be feel-good measures to try to increase cultural exchanges and so on, we're not really dealing with the fundamental problem, which is as long as Palestinians are living under Israeli apartheid, we're not going to see any meaningful progress, and it's going to be very difficult to have meaningful cultural exchanges when one side is completely dominating the other side.
Omar, with the Palestinian support having Gaza absorbed by Egypt and let's say giving part of the West Bank to an autonomous Palestinian state?
I mean, look, it's important to remember that the Palestinians have already made a historic compromise by renouncing effectively their rights to 78% of their historic land, I mean, nearly 80%, by recognizing Israel. And what was supposed to happen is that Israel was supposed to reciprocate and end the occupation of merely 22% of the occupied territories. The idea that the Palestinians right now are being asked to compromise yet again, that compromise was not sufficient, I mean, it's very difficult to imagine what would actually be satisfactory to Israel at this stage. And whatever it is, if it denies Palestinians real viability, then it's just not really progress towards anything meaningful. I don't think that proposal is going to cut it, because ultimately Palestinians belong in the Palestinian territories and they have to have the right to self-determination in their own land.
Micah, again, we get back to the point on the Israeli side. Let's suppose that Israel decides to give back major portions of the West Bank. How does Israel handle that with their more conservative right-wing settlers who don't want to give back any of the West Bank?
No, I think that the vast majority of Israelis would go ahead with the peace process and with the peace procedure, and they will be educated to that. They're actually moving in that direction, and we see that by all the general polls. The difference, though, and this is a big issue, 25 years ago, in the early 90s, I said to Abbas personally, I said, say yes to the American plan. Whatever it is, just say yes, and then fine-tune it afterwards. Just say yes, and you'll get it. You'll get what you need, but you have to say yes. The problem is they're not saying yes, they're saying no. And when you move away from the table, it's basic. It's the basic ABCs of diplomacy. When you leave the table, you can't get the deal.
But to Omar's point, the Palestinians are going to be asked to accept a deal in which they're not going to get huge portions of their land that they feel is rightfully theirs.
No, I mean, the reality is, and if you were asking me today, if the Palestinian Authority were to come to me today and say, what can we do to advocate for a better plan, I would say propose a real plan. Come out with a serious plan, a plan that Israel can tolerate, a plan that will defend their issues, and a plan that the United States would support. But they're not doing that. We don't have a plan. Instead, they left the table. By leaving the table, they advocate all possibilities of anything moving ahead, and that's where the problem exists.
Omar, is it a problem that the Palestinians are rejecting whatever plan right out of hand without even seeing it?
That is simply not the case. The plan has been put forward not just by the Palestinians, by the way, but by the entire Arab League. There is something called the Arab Peace Initiative, which again proposes not just recognition, but full normalization of relations between the Arab world and Israel in exchange for Israel ending the occupation of a mere 22% of historic Palestine.
Yeah.
Israel did not accept the peace deal. That is absolutely not the case. That anybody can look that up factually. Israel rejected the Arab Peace Initiative.
In principle, they did. In principle, they did accept the Arab peace plan with the idea that they would be able to.
What does it mean to accept it on principle and then to continue expanding settlements in the Palestinian territories that they're supposed to end the occupation of? That's entirely meaningless and rhetorical. What we need is real action on the ground.
No, actions are one thing, deal is another. Deal is on paper. So in principle, they accepted it, and they said, let's come and talk about the problems that we have with it.
We can all accept a lot of things in principle, but I think the question is, will any real actions be taken on either side? Micah Halper and Omar Baddar, thank you both for coming in. We appreciate it.